Welcome everyone to first little coach athlete podcast that was stimulated from an original podcast that I did with athlete Becca Neeson. This is her husband Jeff, who I've been coaching for a little over half a year now.
Yeah, it's just
We've been
over
working
6 months.
together
I think we
for
started in March of last year.
okay, March of last year,
Oh, sorry, March of this year.
March of
Sorry,
this
March of
year.
24. So yeah,
It seems like a long time. We worked together for quite a while, and I want Jeff to introduce him and kind of what kind of racing you do currently, and where you kind of um, actually, yeah, we'll just go and start with who you are, your relationship is with your family. I think would also be good to know because you're a working dad and you're also a GI doc, and then understanding. Gosh, I don't really know how to do these intros kind of thing,
sure. All right.
but I'll let you introduce
Sure.
yourself.
So I'm Jeff. I will be 43 in 3 days. So not a spring chicken
Oh,
anymore. Uh, I am a dad of two boys who are 6 and 9. We're very active. I heard about London from my wife, Becca, who started racing esports on Zwift 3 years ago now, 2 to 3 years ago, and met London almost a year ago, I think now. I'd always kind of been thinking about coaching, and so she introduced us. My background is I've always been an active person, played lots of sports growing up, and then in college I was a Division 1 rower, which I walked on too. Just being a tall guy, I guess, because we're going to be talking about cycling, it's important to note that I'm 6'4" or 191 centimeters tall and a solid 190, 195, but somewhere between 190 and 195 pounds, depending on my water weight. So that's kind of like 86 to 88 kilos. So not a small person. And because I was a heavyweight rower, I have, maintained I'm heavy for that. I got into cycling after college when I went started in med school. I actually got inspired to cycle because I saw Lance Armstrong win his first Tour de France. I guess not technically win, but I thought saw it as a win, and because I was in
you
France
still
that
won
summer.
technically.
And I was inspired to look into cycling. But after 4 years of rowing, there wasn't much time. And so in medical school, I bought my first bike. And after about a year, I started racing in New York City and raced through medical school residency and then in New York City and then moved out to California to do my GI training where I stopped racing because racing on the West Coast is kind of not near the Bay Area. It's hours drive, and I just didn't have the time. Plus, the riding was so beautiful out here. I didn't really feel as much of a need to race, and plus, there were plenty of group rides. And I then got into Zwift when my our first son was born in 2015. I started seeing it pop up on my friends' Strava feeds and wondering what the hell they were doing in the islands of Polynesia. Um,
Yeah.
got a beta account in the summer of 2015, and riding on Zwift was a lot more interesting than looking at an erg monitor that's 4 inches by 4 inches and just numbers. And so I was already used to training, looking at a screen. And in fact, racing in New York City, I bought one of the early magnet and fan trainers to ride through the winter, which got me into Netflix. So the indoor riding thing was already something I would do. And then I started racing in 2020 when the pandemic hit because I'd always wanted to race on Zwift, but I don't really interact with Facebook, so I didn't hear about the early racing scene, but got in early in WTRL TTTs, and I've been racing ZRL since the inaugural season in September of 2020. Always kind of just doing my own thing, but always thinking about a coach. And so when my wife introduced me to London, thinking that we would have fun nerding out on coaching techniques, I was pretty excited to start. And so that's kind of what brought us here. I guess, for people who are interested in Zwift and in esports, I'm I'm a B. I'm on the borderline of B to A. My heft keeps me in
He's a B
B.
that blows up my A.
Yes. So, we won't get into we might because we like to nerd out, but my size allows me to stick with riders who are much smaller, so I can maintain a lower watts per kilo. But I can hold on with the A group as well. And it's been, so I'm kind of right in that borderline. I also race on indieVelo now, Training Peaks Virtual, as of yesterday.
Yeah,
and and in that category, I'm usually in Pen One for that. And so, I love racing. I typically race 1 to 2 times a week, and mainly do a mixture of different things. More in the kind of time trials or anything you can draft in, where watts make more of a difference than watts per kilo. And I've gotten into a little bit into gravel riding and racing living here in Northern California. Haven't really, I've trained seriously for them, but haven't really raced yet seriously because even though there are a bunch here where I live in Sonoma County, it is a little hard to get away from the family. So that's probably too long an
um,
intro, but that's who I am.
it gives you a good background. You have a lot of diverse experience in where you're kind of coming from, which is really cool because I have it's not just you, but other athletes who are just regular people, individuals who have busy lives and do many other things and come into cycling and out of cycling for various different reasons. So it is really cool to and good to include that kind of information. I'm kind of curious during residency, during med school, probably when I was like 4 years old and in diapers, I'd imagine. Um,
Yeah,
how many
that's
hours were you training a week for that, for the racing? What did that kind of look like? Because I
yeah.
imagine these races might not have been nearby.
Well, actually, New York City has a great racing scene throughout
Okay.
the mid spring through the early fall. There's a race in Central Park or Central Park, or Prospect Park in Brooklyn, basically every Saturday and or Sunday for almost 6 months of the year. Central Park is a 10-kilometer loop. It is actually exactly the same as Park Perimeter in Zwift. They've done a really good job of recreating it, and so that is the loop. The races would start typically between 5:30 and 6 in the morning on a Saturday or Sunday, and we had to finish the races by 8 a.m. when the regular park users got in. And Prospect Park was a like 5 to 6K loop with a small hill in it as well. There was a regular crit on Thursday nights, and there was a Tuesday night crit in New York City, in New Jersey, about a 45-minute ride away. So you could race a lot. Through med school, I had more time, depending. I didn't really count hours. I didn't really have other responsibilities other than school, which obviously was a lot. But I would just kind of go out and ride. I didn't, I was riding and racing with people who did have coaches, but I didn't have a coach at that time. It took me a couple years before I got even a heart rate monitor. I just had like a cat eye with a magnet that was measuring miles, and you could see your total miles and speed averages for each ride. But at some point, maybe I created a brief spreadsheet, but I never really collected that on any kind of real way. There were also races, drive out away from New York, and I would do a couple of those every so often, and I would do okay, but I just never had a consistent training plan. They Right before I left New York in 2013, there was the tour of the Battenkill, which was one of the early. It's not a gravel race, but it was a 100K race, 60 miles, of which about 15 to 20 were on gravel roads in upstate New York City, about a 4-hour drive from New York. And I had done it once before and just had a bad day and pulled out, which was one of the few races I ever didn't, I never finished because that was just not what I normally do. But I wanted to come back and do well, and I actually hired a coach for 2 to 3 months beforehand and put in kind of more consistent training, but it was all heart rate based. And I was riding again like I am right now between 5:30 and 7 in the morning on a trainer mostly. I did one tune-up race that also was kind of gravel, had gravel sections in New Jersey, and finished I think 12th, 13th in 2013, which was it was a pretty decent sized Cat 4 field. I got on the border. I could stay with the front group in 3-4 fields, but I never raced consistently, and I'm not a sprinter. And most of the races were more kind of sprint type circuit races, and so never really gained enough upgrade points, which was fine with me because the amount of training that I could do, I could have fun in 4 races, and I could challenge myself in 3-4 races, but really having to go the extra distance to upgrade would have taken a lot more training than I would have really wanted to do. So that
There's
was so that was my but I had heard the term that I was pretty much and definitely fit into the kind of zone 3 racer where I just rode hard all the time, but never hard enough to make significant improvements, and never easy enough for my body to to build enough muscle to allow me to improve to the next level.
sure. That kind of makes me curious. What are some of the things that we've been doing, or what are some of the tips that you find most helpful in your training currently, or that you've found most helpful when you started training with me?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I knew that I needed a coach not to push me. I am an idiot who likes to hurt myself. If you tell me to go hard, or if I can tell myself to go hard and I can go deep, um, and I can do that consistently. Uh, but I do have trouble knowing when to rest. And so having someone tell me that it's time to stop going hard or put that on a calendar so that I don't go hard is important. And so I had started that. I had learned about zone 2, polarized training in zone 2 about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and noticed there was a big difference that like on race days I went hard, or if I didn't do 2 races, I would do a hard like a VO2 or a threshold type workout, and then the rest of the days I would just ride easy-ish, and I would force myself to ride easy-ish. But so I was noticing the difference, but I really needed someone to schedule in a rest time for me. Otherwise, I'll just keep riding. But the other thing that I've noticed, which it's obviously been helpful, is I never did any kind of periodization. I never kind of focused on some aspect and built it up and then switched it up. I would just kind of throw in races or whatever type of workout that I kind of wanted to. And I like threshold and VO2 max because they're painful, and so it felt like I was doing something, but it was never done with any kind of planning in mind. And so I have definitely seen the benefits of doing threshold blocks, doing VO2 max blocks that we've been doing over the last 6 months, and seeing how that creates different types of adaptations and different changes that have effect on my racing and on the performance side. But I had never done that before.
Yeah. So for reference, we've been working on what's called a high intensity block. They go by various names: Salzburg blocks, um, micro shock cycles, things of that kind of nature, in which um, you'll generally see about 7 to 10 workouts within about 5 days, where an individual does 7 to 10 high intensity workouts within those 5 to 10 days. And these workouts generally range from about 16 to 30, 40 minutes of high intensity work of threshold of VO2 max. I've seen this upwards of 2 weeks long doing that kind of stuff. It's like a stage race length of stuff. And we see similar adaptations too with doing, this is why a lot of people kind of get stuck and they just go hard all the time because they see this initial gain from these shock cycles. But the problem is that your body eventually just can't keep up when we start to go back down after that week initially because you don't have the recovery. But they are really good, and there are some studies out there that do show if you do that for 1 week and then you do one hard day or 2 hard days for the next couple weeks, it allows your body to recoup and kind of maintain those gains. And so we've been doing those. And I'm kind of curious, how do you prepare yourself? How do you schedule it for yourself to be able to perform those weeks? What do you notice happens to mood, maybe sleeping, eating, or any kind of
Yeah.
other RPE related signals?
So, I mean, I like going hard, so I look forward to those. Although sometimes I do get a little nervous going into some of the blocks of like, of am I going to continue to see gains? Because I am one of those goal oriented people that if I'm not seeing improvement, then I worry that something, that I'm not doing it right. So I always wanted to be better than the last time. So, but mentally preparing, I like pushing myself, and so this has not been. Uh, all so I've liked the challenge. I initially started over the last in the beginning parts of the month. It's always easiest just scheduling, although mentally it's not always that easy to be doing them first thing in the morning, 5:30. Getting up between 5 and 5:30, and getting on the bike between 5:30 and 5:45, so that I can get an hour and 15 to an hour and 30 minutes of training in before the family really gets moving around 7 o'clock. Um, I felt like everything was going all right, but in talks with my wife, she realized that I was getting tired or more tired and a little crankier, and that I should not do too many mornings per week because of my ability to be a good father and a good partner. And so I've looked into ways of scheduling it into my workday where I have a meeting and or doing it over lunch. And then even sometimes I was trying to avoid doing afternoons when the boys are home, but they do need decompression time. And so if I can do it a little bit toward the end of the day, that wasn't impacting family life as much. Also, because of my work schedule with ZRL, the only time I can do it is at 10 p.m. on Monday night, which really is a terrible time to do it. But that changes the equation, and I then really can't train on the Tuesday afterwards because I'm not really in bed asleep before 12:30 at night, which is I'm usually in bed by 9:30. So I try to stay on top of the schedule, but I know that consistency is key, and my wife and I knows that if I'm not exercising regularly, I'm also less of a good person, and so it's about finding the balance of it, and that too many mornings, even though I thought I was doing well, because I was not doing this in the middle of awake time for the rest of the family, was impacting how I was when they were awake. So I've had to make changes, which actually, you perform better at 11 in the morning compared to 5:30 in the morning. It does feel better. So I still do a regular Friday morning race that I've set up at 6 in the morning on Training Peaks Virtual, the Dirty Friday races that I've been setting up because I have a good crew of friends. But rarely, it may be one other morning where I ride that early, but typically no more than 1 to 2 early morning rides per week so that I can maintain that sleep. You had also mentioned nutrition and eating. The other thing I never did until about a year and a half ago was eat well on the bike. I'm a big guy, and I was like, I have plenty of energy. I don't need to really think about nutrition. I have enough. I carry enough with me. But then learning about the number of carbs that you can eat per hour can actually have a significant impact on how you do. And so I've started both in drink mixes and gummies and other forms of easy digest carbs, eat a lot more and probably somewhere in depending on what I'm doing, but 60 to 90 per hour, even on short rides. I can probably eat more. I've pretty much an iron stomach as a GI doctor. I can do whatever I want, but
There's all the
it's
tricks.
just hard to just consume that much. But I've noticed that I feel stronger at the end of races. I feel the intervals toward the end. If I have I definitely notice when I forget to bring enough gummies and fill up my water bottles with enough drink mix. So eating more, I'm not gaining weight in any real way, even though I eat significantly more calories while I am exercising. And I feel much better, not just during the ride, but I also notice that rather than feeling kind of like a zombie for the rest of the day after a hard ride, I my legs are tired, but I'm not, I don't need to take a nap. I'm not raiding the fridge as soon as I get home. And I'm not a zombie for my family in the afternoon when I eat appropriately after a bike ride. So I've definitely noticed that I really do need to pay attention to that and eat more during it.
Yeah. Nutrition is one of the big things. I like that you said 60 to 90 grams per hour. Obviously, larger individuals, it's getting closer to 90. It is kind of interesting. I like that you mentioned that you kind of feel less tired, and there actually is a significant relationship between the more you eat during your ride or even before, the better recovery you're going to have. Um, I noticed that when I have actually a heavy meal before I go on ride, um, workout might suck for the first 2 hours or something because I'm just so full of food and digested. You have a huge parasympathetic response. uh, that it kind of decreases your performance. But during that ride, you recover quicker. And there was a really cool study that I was just reading on. It was either marathon racers or ultra marathon racers. I thought it was really cool. Where they like had them well fed or kind of partially well fed before their race, and then they looked at their recovery a day after they had performed the race, and they saw huge decreases in inflammatory markers, and increases in recovery markers as well, when they were much more well fed. And that's just the body system. Hey, we have energy available. We have energy to waste to kind of grow ourselves and develop. Um, this is um, we learn in our right now. I'm learning about autophagy in class right now. For those of you who don't know, I'm currently in grad school and getting my PhD in biomedical sciences, and it's been kind of cool that it complements my exercise physiology background. Um, but yeah,
Well, yeah,
that's
I
all
mean,
cool stuff.
often exercise is people use for weight loss, and I've always been a big guy, so my weight has actually been pretty stable for the past 20 years since I left college. But um, the idea going away from fasted, like when you're working on your endurance, you need those calories. You need to eat. You're just going to suffer if you don't, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to then feel worse and eat a lot more afterwards. And so, uh, you know,
Mm,
I people I find are often fearful of eating more because what if that means that you're not going to benefit yourself, or lose weight, and there are other ways around doing it, and it's not worthwhile going into significant calorie deficit because you just feel worse and it doesn't actually lead to more weight loss. Is something I want
yeah,
to
and that
point
weight
out.
loss is generally coupled with stagnation of power or a reduction in power output. Physically on the bike, endurance wise, for other sports, even lifting, like powerlifting wise. So even just maintaining weight and trying to build up the power is generally the more recommended way. And like you said before, a bigger guy, you can produce just a hell of a lot more power, and you're able to keep up with smaller guys like me, who, I can put out 5 watts per kilogram, but I'm only doing 300 watts. So, like, okay, well, he's there on the flat, maybe, and he can go uphill quick, but overall, your power is just going to be sheer amount is going to surpass what I have. Even on hills, you have less watts per kilogram to do than I do, which is cool.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I think I actually, having switched to indieVelo, where there's no watts per kilogram, I think it's an interesting thing because you're so accustomed to in Zwift looking at the watts per kilogram and then worrying about the kilogram factor. And people really have an interest, get so hung up on that metric when really what we care about is speed, and speed has obviously to do with how many kilograms you're moving around, but it has a lot more to do with your number of watts. And if we focus more on speed, I think changing that, having switched to a different platform, working also on a different platform that prioritizes the speed, which is actually what you care about in a race, is how fast you get there, not how many watts per kilogram you did. is healthier from a mental standpoint of getting people to focus on the right thing, and not worry about the kilograms as much. But I think it's also a better metric. On the flip, and not on the flip side, but part of that, and why it's not necessarily fair, and I'm glad that Zwift is moving away from the power curve watt per kilogram metrics to a racing score, is that once I realized about punch, how you're working hard at the time that you need to work hard, and that trying to save as much energy when you don't need to, trying to play the game of can I have the lowest watts per kilogram in the front group, uh, made me a better racer. And so actually, focusing more on racecraft and speed when you need it, I thought, helped change how I approach the races and tactics and what I needed to do. And so that kind of mentality.
I guess switching gears a little bit, I know you've been working on actually a lot of your tactics, and the differences between indieVelo and Zwift and stuff. Um, Tell me about some of that. Tell me some of the things you've been trying. Describe. I want you to describe your racing style again, just in case people
Yeah.
missed it. And then how does that play into your
So
tactics?
obviously in tactics, you have to you have to play to your strengths, and sure, know what you can do well, and also know the dynamics of whatever game system, or if you're racing outside, whatever, the real physics, of life. It obviously helps if you're toward the top end of your category or the race, where you can put in more tactics. But racecraft is about using your strengths and your watts where they matter most. And so I'm not. I'm not really a sprinter. I obviously, as a big guy, can put out high watts at the end of the race, and I have a lot of endurance, so I may have more high watts at the end of a long race, than people who would consider themselves to be sprinters. So I don't do poorly if it comes down to a sprint, but my bigger strengths are my endurance and the fact that I can just hold high watts for a very long time. And so that if I get a gap, between me and a group, I can hold that gap and expand it unless someone else wants to really chase me down. And so the dynamics in Zwift after PD 4.1 point one, had been a little bit more of a benefit where it slows down the speed so that a pack doesn't churn as much. But the dynamics of indieVelo, which are a little bit more like real world situations, I need to, have allowed me to look into where can I break away, because I prefer to do that. It's more fun for me playing to my strengths rather than just sitting in and waiting to wait for a sprint. And so I've tried to look for where does the game allow for breakaways or separation. Being at the, obviously hills will do that. And if you're at the top of your division, just going harder than everyone else is a great way of breaking up the field and breaking away and then staying away. But, that's just going hard, and that's up to your fitness level. So, your question's a little bit more toward the racecraft, and you brought up, so we put out on the Freeboard Instagram channel, which I'll give a little plug to M, who's been managing that. So the one that was initially put up is where was in the points race. And so a teammate and I, who's also kind of an endurance type of athlete with a very, strong, high, 20-minute power, we knew that at the FTS, people would be going hard and then want to rest. And that if you can stay in that front group and use your arrow not to get a fast finish, but to move through that and get that slingshot effect, you could get a couple seconds, while people through that slingshot, and then people want to rest, which will give you a couple more seconds before they realize that you're actually going hard for it. And so it turned out another strong guy in our race was doing something similar, although he actually picked up FTS points, which was impressive. But we basically attacked through the bunch, not for the line, but at the line. And so we turned on the afterburners after as everyone was cooling down. And so we weren't going for points; we were going for slingshot, and that allowed us to go through the pack at higher speed. And so as soon as we were able to get past them, that gave us a couple seconds. People were continuing to rest. It gave us a couple of seconds more. So we had 4 to 5 seconds within the first 30 seconds after that sprint, and then the three of us kind of were able to work together. And because of just the dynamics are no longer as fast with the churn, by working consistently together and no one working consistently behind us, we were able to grow that out to the next sprint to about 35, 40 seconds, and then continue on to the point that my teammate and I were able to drop the other guy and win by 30 seconds or so, which was a lot of fun to be able to break away at the end. Another one which we're putting together is, and this is helpful that I'm a larger person, but I saw Michael Kameninski do it in one of the Zwift World Series, maybe not World Series, whatever they call it, the Zwift Games races last year. But Nathan Garris called the downhill is the new uphill, and then using the same kind of slingshot effect on a downhill, if you use the right downhill. Can also give you that gap. And so in the last ZRL race, you I attacked down off the corkscrew climb because that went from a very sharp downhill to a very steep uphill, and I used the draft fan to maximize the speed coming from the back of the pack and hitting the front of the group at max speed, and immediately I got 4 seconds through it and was able to hold on to grow the gap. It makes it very hard to chase to close that gap, especially if you're holding high power. But a couple people, two on my team knew what I was doing, so they were able to match me a little bit. And I ended up holding on for fourth with that group. But being able to get that gap and trying the tactics of where do your strengths lie? If you're an endurance person, how can you make the breakaway happen? It is obviously you could try to attack right from the gun. That's very hard because it takes a lot of effort. But people really don't like letting other people go. So where can you use point spanners where people might want to rest, or where can you use the slingshot effect off downhills? Obviously, on some of the longer downhills, if you can push the pace and make the elastic snap, that has that impact as well. In indieVelo, if you look at wind speed, attacking when you don't want to attack too much in a headwind. It's harder, but people then obviously be able to. The draft effect is even more. But attacking right before it turns to a tailwind or a crosstail, allows you to, if you can get that gap, that tailwind will push your speed faster than someone else who's behind you. And especially if you have higher watts, it's much harder to close a gap in a tailwind just because the speed differential is so high. So, looking at the course, knowing the course where the slingshot effect might work, where wind or braking in indieVelo might be able to be helpful. Finding those parts of the course, it makes it more fun to get a breakaway. And that's where my strengths lie, is kind of holding high power for long periods of time. So that's where I'm looking for the efforts.
Those are both really great examples. Both understanding, okay, I have a high power for a long time and heavyweight, and so when can I use the downhills for my to my advantage, and then also when can I kind of slingshot myself through when other people are going to want to rest, create that few second gap that's just enough for me to basically hold against everyone else. Because someone like me, I just can't do that. I need some kind of hilly course where I can do a bunch of punchy climbs and eventually just wear people down. Because I
But
can
yeah,
just hit those higher watt per kilogram numbers over and over, but it's a
yeah. I
totally
mean, knowing
different
your
course
repeat,
compared
having working on your repeatability, being able to do high efforts over and over again. That's often people struggle with that. They can do one or two punches, but then they'll been less able to continue pushing on. And so, part of that's genetics, I think, with me. It's just that I can do that, but working in ways that you can repeat high, efforts will make it more likely that you can whittle down the field, so that you could eventually. It's easier, obviously, to break away from a small group than a larger group. But I also
Hmm.
would look at more downhill attacks. We saw that in the Glyph Heights. I was able to break away with two other people on the downhill. Obviously, it was a small group that we were breaking away from, but on the downhill again into that big uphill, I initially wasn't even trying to break away. I was just trying to get more of a rest by going from the back of the pack to go into a super tuck. There is a bug with the super tuck where this person super tucking has a significant advantage. I know Zwift is looking into that, but it's not fixed yet. So if you can get to the front with some speed and get into a super tuck, it's very hard for people to stay in your draft. And then, especially if you put in the power hard into those sharp uphills coming down the epic climb, uh, we were able to grow a small gap of 3 to 4 seconds to 15, and people just couldn't close the gap to us, which was a downhill. And people don't often try to attack on the downhill because it doesn't seem like a good place. But one of the guys in the top three is a 60 kilogram guy, so he just timed it well to stay behind. With a guy who's 92 kilos and me at 88 on the downhill, and so you don't have to be big, but you do have to anticipate it more if you're not as big, because you don't have your you know inertia to move you along.
Um, cool. So I want to make time for your questions for me.
Yeah.
Um, so what do you got for me?
So I mean, you know, I, you know, uh, I was just wondering, how do you, when someone comes to work for, comes to talk to you about what coaching, what is the kind of information that is useful to bring to that first meeting, in kind of how do you assess someone and assess to kind of and how to bring out their goals of what to accomplish?
Um, that's a good question. Um,
And I know you can, it may be if it's helpful to break it up. I'm not a newbie. So maybe for people who are not, I think it's useful in these forums. I mean, people don't always know that, think that coaches are only for seasoned athletes or trying to take their performance to the next level. But so for someone who is relatively new to a sport, who is going to see the most gains, but, how would you approach, finding out about them if they're new compared to someone who is more of a seasoned athlete?
yeah, it generally comes down to athletic history, and also um, education surrounding athletic performance and exercising. I've had a variety of athletes from people who are like I had a 60-year-old grandma at one point who was wanting to help with some of her adventure races. And so we worked a lot about, okay, where are you at now? For her, it was 3 rides a week. She did these long, long races and she didn't really know when she could ride. And so I had to coach her a little bit different than an athlete like you who can race and ride, 5 to 7 times a week and do a lot, or even my current rowing athlete at Purdue right now who is doing an ungodly 10 to 12 workouts a week. He's just hammering it along. It's a lot of workouts. Of course, he's in base, and so he's just constantly trying to build up that volume. And so it kind of comes down to where are these people at? I try to look a lot at training peaks because a lot of that information can be easily uploaded. If it's not, I generally ask about volume. I'll ask about what they know about training periodization, and also what kind of intensities they do, what their heart rate is at. I tend to look at that kind of stuff. And based on that, I can go in and determine, okay, this is an appropriate amount of stimulus for this individual because they have done workouts, let's say, that are consistent 100 TSS workouts consistently. Okay, let's polarize this a little bit more. Let's get a little bit more higher. We're going to slowly build up those higher intensity workouts to get them closer to, 110, 120, 130, and then push down those easier workouts down to, 70, 60, 50. Um, some of the things I really like, and that I really try to figure out with athletes is kind of their headspace and their mindset surrounding exercise. Are these people who really want to get faster? What kind of goals do they have? What are the things that they like to look for? For you, you're very goal focused, very like power, tactics, want to improve, very driven, and that's fantastic. I'm like that too. I love that drive and that curiosity. But if other athletes were like, I just want to be able to like finish a race, and like that's totally fine too. We put them on a plan. We focus more on consistency. We focus on learning about some of the different ways in which you can work out, different workouts, what they like, what kind of brings them back to getting and staying consistent. And it really comes down to the mindset of the individual and getting them to enjoy the process of exercise, figuring out what they enjoy. I think is the biggest key there.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think setting goals is important. I mean, how do you help set manageable goals, but goals that actually help people push themselves? Um, you know, you know, one of the reasons I didn't get a coach for a long time is that I didn't. I was just having fun, but I wanted to get faster. But that is a goal. But kind of setting more concrete goals. I mean, so that people can see how they're improving or not. So how do you help formulate? Work on that, or do you feel like that's important to set kind of more concrete goals?
You kind of go back and forth with concrete goals, like a specific power number or a specific time, because I've had trouble with that previously with myself, where I try to set, oh, I want to, for the longest time, I wanted to be able to hold 300 watts for an hour. That was like my biggest thing. And I would just drill myself and drill myself and drill myself, and I just could never reach it. Um, and I just remember one random day I was able to do it. It just was like out of the blue. My previous coach, he always said fitness is fickle. It can go up and down, and it comes and goes in waves, and we can do a lot to modulate it and get it into this relative upward trajectory. But I tend not to focus too much um, on goals related to specific power numbers and specific heart rate. I really tend to focus on perfecting the workout, perfecting the exercise, and mastering your craft as an individual. That is something that people can work on. That is something that's you can specifically do. Yeah, it's cool to have like these crazy power numbers that I think people can do, and they generally are like attainable. Like right now, we're kind of I had this goal to hit 400 watts for 20 minutes. I think it's totally doable because we're like 10 watts away. We're pretty close. I'm like, yeah, we can probably get there. Um, but I really like to focus on having people perfect those workouts. So if we're doing threshold, we're actually doing threshold. If we're doing endurance, we're doing endurance, and we're getting the right RPE feeling in our body and in our legs and in our breathing rate and our speaking, um, that allows us to get back and be consistent and enjoy the workout. Um, so yeah, my goals are less hard line specific and more about perfecting and understanding, I should say, and understanding one's body.
Cool. Well, yeah, and how do you, what helps best, for your athletes, how to communicate with you? What are the things that you want to know from them, so that they can give you the feedback that you can course correct or keep pushing, or know that it's time for them to take a break. What are the kind of key? There's the comments in Training Peaks. The emojis or just the 1 to 10 scale. Is it having are there keywords or things that you find are helpful for seeing where your athletes are?
Sure. So there obviously is the Training Peaks RPE scale, and that's a modified part of a modified Borg scale. The original is 6 to 20, and they do a 1 to 10, which I think is it's more intuitive. But in exercise physiology, it's a little bit less intuitive, because 6 is like the lowest intensity you can perform workout. It's like walking, but really you can do less intensity if you just lay down. Um, but I really try to split everything into, instead of like 5, 6, 7 zones. Exercise physiologists really try to split things down into 3 zones. And so then I give people a lot of keywords between these 3 zones. So we have the first zone, which is what we call the moderate domain. This is when people are, um, you should be able to talk. Your mindset is in the world. It's not internal, it's external. You're focusing on the birds and the trees and you're enjoying. Generally, it's very happy. It can also be very boring for people. Generally, not a very stimulating activity. This is like your 4 hour endurance pace. For most individuals, for most guys, I quite frankly like them to be at like 50 to 60% heart rate for a lot of guys, and for women, maybe 60 to 70, a little bit higher. It's a very, very easy, manageable pace. Your breathing is under control. You can generally breathe through your nose pretty easily, unless you get snot rockets like me and you're just blowing them all over the place. I have that issue. Ever since I broke my nose a couple of years ago, it's never gone away. The next one we have is the heavy intensity. This is where we kind of include our tempo. So this is where you can kind of start feeling your legs are getting a little bit heavier, like you're actually pushing. You have to focus on the effort. This kind of gives people a lot of like enjoyment because it's not super hard, but it gives them the sense that they're working. This is why we call this the heavy domain. Your breathing becomes a little bit more labored, and you can only say like a few words at a time. Um, and generally, people can see a lot of improvements in this with this domain consistently over time because it's not super taxing. Um, then we have the severe intensity domain, which is where we see a lot of probably the most adaptations and benefits. But it's the feeling of I'm going to die if I don't stop. You have this very, very severe breathing, this very internal focus. It's very difficult to want to keep pursuing and keep going. For me and for a lot of people who have exercise induced asthma or bronchoconstriction, it gets very kind of like can get scary at some points to be like, I feel like I'm just shutting down and I'm, um, yeah, losing the ability. It's hitting the red line. For a lot of athletes, that red line actually is different between untrained and trained individuals. This happens in trained individuals that untrained at about 65% max heart rate. These people who don't work out. And then in trained individuals, it happens anywhere between 80 to 90% of max heart rate, depending on your training and your status. So a lot of pros get upwards of the 90, 92, 93%, and they just hold that, which is pretty crazy. But
Yeah,
most
doing the
individuals are about
calculations
85.
as you're saying on a different screen. Just yeah, yeah. What my heart rate at the 90% is around 170, and that's I can hold threshold for a fair amount there, but that's where I'm starting to question life choices.
Yeah, start questioning life choices. And so using that stuff, we can help kind of gauge people. Yes, are you in this zone? Are you not in this zone? I also tend to look at heart rate and power. So if we're holding this power, do we see a massive heart rate drift? Is one indicator of those kinds of things. I generally like to see people say things like, yes, it felt manageable during this time, or no, it did not feel manageable. I probably should have backed down. I generally like to see increases in power over the time for intervals. That's another good sign that they did the workout effectively. Um, there's many other different things that I do like to see for individual workouts, but um, I did want to talk about overall training and understanding whether people are stressed and whether they need to take a break or
Yeah,
whatnot.
that was going to be my next question.
It
Is
is
what
generally
when do
recommended.
you like tell people? I know you think you want to keep pushing it, but we really need to pull back.
When do I tell people?
Yeah, or
Yeah,
what are the kind of signs that someone needs to kind of pull back a little bit?
there's pretty evident physiological markers that someone needs to pull back. So we will see massive decreases in heart rate for the same power. This is because your VO2 max is actually like growing out, but your body hasn't fully recovered yet. And so we're actually seeing a depressive response in the heart rate from the parasympathetic vagal tone that's decreasing our body's ability to produce. And this is also partially why the effort feels harder. And so the RPE for the same power will also feel much harder. So instead of being at, let's say, a 5 at 200 watts, you're going to feel like you're at a 7. You're like, this sucks. Take a break. Reduce the power, reduce the time, take a break. Another thing is we'll see changes in mood. For some athletes like myself, if I work out too much, like this past weekend, I had 2 really hard days back to back. Sunday evening, I was a gremlin. I I did not want to see people. I did not want to be around people. I just wanted to sleep. Um, we will also see sleep disturbances, actually, now that I mention it. Some athletes, if you're working too hard, we also see this with people who are trying to sleep in the heat. Um, you'll see decreases in HRV and increases in resting heart rate, a decrease in HRV by about 5 to 10 points, and an increase in resting heart rate by about 10 points. It's a pretty good indicator. We need to cut it for a day or two, or three, postpone the training plan, depending on the athlete, and wait till you kind of get back to that feeling of feeling normal again and can sleep and get back on a regular schedule. We can also see disturbances in eating, feeling hungry when you're full or not feeling hungry. It can be, it really depends on the individual. I get really, really hungry after I work too hard on a workout, but then I get like full, but then I'm still just constantly hungry and still wanting to eat. And it's because your body kind of goes into this um, deprecative state of like, I don't have enough energy in me. And you need to start stockpiling stuff because I didn't have enough energy, which is why eating during your workout is really, really crucial for minimizing that. It also minimizes weight gain, but also maximizing performance adaptations and recovery. So,
Have you felt like
uh,
I've needed to take a break? I mean, so interestingly, I've been super consistent for decades. I've really not taken a break. I've been very lucky in not getting significantly injured, where I've had to take a long period of time and I've been
mhm,
consistent. I've also not done periodization or gone as hard, I think, consistently in the ways that I've been training with you, so I mean I've seen some new gains. I did take the 2 week break over the summer because of travel, which was needed and a lot of fun. But I didn't train hard. I ran a lot, and we did some body weight lifting and threw that in. It was weird because it took me a while to get back to where I was before I went on vacation. And to me, it's like, well, why would I ever take a break then? But I also know that it is important that when you recover, that's when, or when you rest, that's when your body can heal. And I do think I feel stronger now than I was before I took the break. But I took the break no, not 3 months ago, right? And so it just, I don't know. It seemed that I had not losses, but I think it was good for mental space to take a break. I don't necessarily think I had to take it at that moment. I wasn't feeling burnt out, and don't feel like I feel like There have been times when we were doing double sessions, threshold in the morning and VO2 max in the evenings.
you're pushing it.
We were really pushing it, and that was to the goal of a long gravel race where I had a mechanical. But then, oh, really, I feel like I performed very well, and we took some time off. But it just have you noticed that and obviously I pointed out at the beginning that my wife felt like I should stop working out in the mornings so much because my mood was changing, and has asked me not to do as many doubles because she was saying I wasn't as kind of person when we were doing as many double sessions. But have you noticed that I've been I haven't felt like I needed to take a break, but I was just wondering if there were some points where you thought maybe we should turn it back based on things that you were seeing or what I was saying to you.
You've been pretty consistent for most of the times, and we've been pretty on top of it. I have had other athletes, specifically younger ones as well, where they're like, they'll just send me I'll get a comment in the ride like, this ride sucked. I hate riding. I never want to ride a bike again. And I'm like, shut up, get back on the bike tomorrow. But that's generally like an indication, okay, they need a quick break, something else is going on. Let's kind of reassess, figure what else is going out if they're going too hard, etc. And looking at those. A lot of my athletes now have also been um, uploading resting heart rate and HRV data, which has kind of made my job a little bit easier and kind of making that executive decision along with their mood changes, any sleep disturbances. Yes, we need to start we take a break or two. I've also been trying to get a lot better at implementing longer breaks, especially after big races. So for athletes, if you have a race of, I like to give 1 day per hour of racing that individuals that you'll generally take off, and then you get back to like an easy day the next day. Um, so for some of my racers, I have one guy who does 2 hour mountain bike races. I generally give him 2 days off after that. We've had really good success, and we don't see a huge drop in um, power or anything along those lines. I have one gal and me as well who do like 3 5 hour, 6 hour gravel races, and we normally take about 4 to 5 days off for those, and we don't see a whole lot of decrements and stuff, and we can be a little bit more consistent. And when you do go back to the workout, it feels new again. It feels novel, and it feels good to be doing it as opposed to sluggish and kind of feeling, oh, do I really have to kind of like do this again, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I've noticed that sometimes I do, it's after a big block, I do start feeling like, oh, why am I, like, is this what I really want to be doing? But I do find that if I go outside and just have one of those endurance rides, which are just enjoying being outside, does make a difference. Um, but yeah, I haven't hit that point of really wanting to stop because
mhm.
we're seeing progress and I
There's
like
some
seeing that.
athletes who specifically need to take like a week or two off, but there is a lot of really good athletes who are more, instead of scheduling that time off, they're more when do I need it and kind of taking it proactively as opposed to just kind of building up all this stress and then burning out, taking 2 weeks off. That's kind of how I used to train, was keep training until you burn out, then take 2 weeks off, and then keep training until you burn out, take 2 weeks off. And I was taking breaks every 2 to 3 times a year. And at that point, I was just like, I don't really want to train like this. It doesn't make me feel great.
Yeah.
Um, and so one such athlete, Niels van der Poel, how to skate 5k.se, how to skate.se if you look it up online. He never scheduled in any breaks, and he was an Olympic gold medalist in the 5 kilometer team skate and 10 kilometer individual time trial. Fast.
Yeah.
Um, and he never scheduled in those breaks, but he always proactively prioritized that resting whenever he needed that within his normal training regimen, within his, his mesocycle or whatever. And that's kind of where I've been going towards more. We still have periodization with base and build and peak phases, and so we kind of use that base training as a means to kind of recoup and reassess the body as well without putting too much additional stress on it. Um, I know for me, actually, when I got done with my last racing block last year, I went to about 2 weeks of just upper zone two work, and I tried to just kind of build up volume there. And I didn't lose a whole too much ton of power, as I would normally if I would have taken 2 weeks off. And I was able to get back to training more, and I felt just as refreshed as if I had taken 2 weeks off completely. And I didn't go crazy from not riding my bike. So,
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was just looking at my training peaks from right after I did the indieVelo stage race, where I did 6 races in 7 days, and then I took a day off, but I felt actually pretty good. Although those first couple workouts, they were definitely hurting a little bit, but I was surprised because
mm,
that was the most I had ever raced in a week, and but it was interesting to see how the body responded toward the end of that, and but didn't I didn't burn out, which I was happy about.
hmm yeah, you could generally push the body for a week or two pretty hard and be able to kind of come back from it. But after that, it gets pretty, at least from what I've seen, it gets pretty tough to continue that because then we start getting into chronic stress responses, and I'm sure you know all about that in gut health.
Yes, which are detrimental. So I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess we should kind of try to wrap it up. But who do you think obviously people who want to increase their performance, but for those who are not, who are kind of looking to get into fitness, why do you think a coach would be worthwhile?
Um, to me, I think a coach, and I think having a good coach for these kind of goals can help not only with consistency, but understanding one's physical body. So, for a lot of athletes who haven't had a coach before, don't have a lot of experience with training and coaching, having a coach that can focus on not only your well being, but your education surrounding exercise can help you understand your body. Um, and that is one of the key elements for elite athletes is that the athletes who understand their body the most and who can pay attention the most um, have better success than their counterparts who don't understand their body as much. And so it can be useful for individuals who are looking to gain a little bit more mobility and function and control over their body and their understanding of well-being and being able to function at a higher level than they were before, even cognitively. Exercise has huge benefits on cognitive processes.
Cool.
And so,
All right. I
do
think
you
we
have
hit
anything
an
to
hour.
add to that?
Yeah. No, no. I think that's good.